Here we go.
Got it?
Yep. He feels decent. He is decent. He's a 2.5 pounder, maybe 3.
Yes, sir.
Bump it. Good job, dude.
Pressure off.
Hey, what's up guys? John from Mongo Fishing. Today I want to talk to you guys about something that I know you've heard of, but maybe you don't know why. And that's red crankbaits in the spring. So let's get into it. I nerd out on this stuff, man. I want to know the whys. I guess that was part of, disarming bombs, right? I wanted to know how it was going to kill me and what I got to do to prevent that from happening. Well, now that I'm bass fishing, I don't want to just know how to catch fish. I want to know why to catch the fish on that particular bait. So I nerd out on this stuff sometimes, guys. All right, guys. So in order to understand why we want to throw red crankbaits in, late winter, early spring, or heck, even all winter into the spring, you kind of need to get into like a little bit of crayfish biology, right? Ultimately, the goal of this is for you guys to understand why guys are out there throwing red traps or red square bills or red whatever in the winter and into the spring to catch some of those bass. So crayfish biology a little bit, some of the, I guess, crayfish habits, and then, I'll occasionally throw up pictures of different sorts of crayfish throughout this. Now, sometimes I may call them crayfish, sometimes I may call them crawdads. I mean, it's the same thing. It's literally, crayfish is like, the official term. Crawdads are what, people just refer to them as. Mud bugs, yabbies, whatever. I mean, there's just ridiculous number of names for them. But so, I may interchange between crawdads and crayfish because it's an interchangeable thing. So keep that in mind. So let's start, I guess, with a little bit of what they are. There's a lot more than one species. And I know people think that a crawdad is a crawdad. But like in Arkansas alone, there's about 60 different species of crayfish. Some of them are mud dwellers, some of them are rock dwellers, streams, and some are like cave species. I mean, there's like 60 different species in Arkansas alone. And worldwide, I want to say it's like 500. I mean, it's just a ridiculous number of different types of crawdads or crayfish. So, but we're going to focus on some that are really, really prevalent, and maybe that'll start making sense why red is the juice. We're going to talk about the devil crawfish, which is known as Cambarus disogenes. That's the scientific name. We're going to talk about the rusty crawfish, which is Orconectus rusticus. We're going to talk about the red swamp crayfish, which is the one that's, kind of like spread, well, the rusties spread quite a bit too. But the red swamp crayfish, which is huge and really prevalent, this is the one you typically think of when you buy crayfish from the store. If you're gonna have a little crawdad boil or whatever, probably the Procambarus clarkii, which is the red swamp crayfish. We're gonna talk about the virile crawfish, which is the Phexonus viralis, if I remember right. So there's the 4 we're primarily going to discuss, but I mean, there's literally hundreds throughout the world, but those 4 are big. So let's talk about those. So I guess let's get into a little bit of biology and, understanding, I guess, some myths versus facts. So there's a myth that crawfish hibernate in the winter, and that is verifiably false. Now, it's funny, if you Google do crawfish hibernate in the winter, the very first thing that pops up is going to tell you yes. And that's from like some guy's personal blog. If you look at some of the other resources, I actually had to quote them. The Ohio Department of Natural Resources, word for word, says that they do not hibernate, but instead they go to deeper, warmer water in the winter. Native North, they have a big, it's just like a website, they have all referenced material. They say that they become less active, but do not become dormant or hibernate. And then of course, there's random blogs from Joe Schmoes who say yes they do, and that's because that's what they've heard in the past. But facts are facts, they don't hibernate. They just become less active. And I know that from personal experience because, well, I'll see if I can throw the picture up right here. This was a picture from Jarrett Rushing and I were out fishing in January of 2020, 38-degree water temp, and he caught about a 2.5 pound largemouth. And if you look inside its throat right there, there's crawdad pinchers sticking out along with some antenna. And then here's another photo of a spotted bass that Jarrett caught on Washita in 50-degree weather in February, I think last year, and same thing. There's crawdad sticking out of his throat. One was 38-degree water, one was 50-degree water, a month and a half apart. So they definitely are not hibernating when the water gets cold. Now, the one with the 50-degree water, that makes a lot more sense because when the water warms up, they become a lot more active, right? You've got, like the bass spawn. If you think about a spawn process, the bass spawn is the mating and laying eggs, fertilizing the eggs, all that fun stuff at the same time, right? That is the bass spawn. Crawdads don't spawn like that. They mate, and then several weeks later is their actual spawn. So they start getting active when the water temp gets in the mid-50s, and then they kind of stay active. And then, the 70s, they get really, really active. But then if the water gets too hot, they start getting less active again and starting to hunker down again. Again, they don't go dormant, they don't hibernate. They just become less active out in the open, ready to get chewed. But it kind of coincides with the bass spawn. It's Mother Nature's way of giving bass some Scooby snacks, right? Because the crappie spawn, the crawdad spawn, the bluegill spawn are all, shad spawn are all related near, either plus or minus from the bass spawn. So keep that in mind. So why red? We're gonna go with the red swamp crayfish for this, just so you can kind of understand a little bit of the reasoning why red. Okay, so when they're juveniles, they're green pumpkins. They're green pumpkins with blue pinchers. In fact, the orange tips, when you see an orange tip on a crawdad's knuckles and the tips of their pinchers, that's because they're getting vitamin A from eating green vegetative matter. But these things start just like any of the other crawdads, this kind of green pumpkin color, basically, little olive drab, if you will. So Cambaris is primarily the mud dwellers. Orconectus species are primarily the rock dwellers. So think of a rock transition bank. It's got large rocks, it's got small rocks. You've got all sorts of different stuff where crawdads are going to want to be in there because you have multiple different places for them to hide as they grow. And eventually they're going to get too big to fit underneath one size of rock, need a different size. And they'll eat diatoms. Diatoms are like one of the world's basic algae. They're kind of a brownish color, but these things turn into, they start developing a red color on their body. And some people assume it's because they're living in these clay banks they've dug themselves into to hibernate, but that's not actually true. They're feeding off of diatoms, and you've heard that old saying that you are what you eat. Well, it starts to change the color of their carapace, of their shell. And so basically what happens is, if it was just them being stained from living in the red clay, well then when they molted, they would change colors completely. And that's not what happens. There is a slight change when they molt, but for the most part, they stay relatively the same color. So as they grow and they get larger, and you start getting this more red, bright red developed color. So that's the reason why red specifically works. Especially for that, right? And like I said, that's one of the most prevalent species of crawdad anywhere. Now, you might ask yourself, but John, what if my, where would I find these things if my lake doesn't have rock transition banks? Maybe it's just a giant muddy lake. Well, if you have boat ramps, then you still have rock transitions, if you will. You still have a place where they can get up under the rocks, in this case being your boat ramp itself. So some lakes you can run a boat ramp pattern. If you can find that sort of bite, that you know, red squarebill bite, you can go run that boat ramp to boat ramp to boat ramp to boat ramp and be productive. It's not guaranteed. You got to find that bite first, but some ramps or some lakes you can really run a good boat ramp pattern if you can find that pattern on that particular lake. Now the virile crawfish, the Orchonectes virilis, you know, that one is, again, it's primarily like a green pumpkin sort of color, but you can start getting more blues and more reds, again, diet based colors. It'll, you know, depending on what their diet, will start to develop, well, and their environment, but it'll start to develop the different colors. And that's why you know, if you're throwing, I don't know, green pumpkin blue one day and it just kind of stops working, but green pumpkin purple starts working, it's because he's starting to get that darker red color from that blue color. Again, their diet helps control the color of the crawdad itself. Rusty crawfish, which I already mentioned before, the Orchonectes rusticus is it's everywhere. Well, not, you know, not officially everywhere, but it is in a bunch of states. Again, it's an invasive species in a lot of states, and again has that dark brown red color. And guys, like I won't be able to post pictures of all these things because some of them are like copyright photos, so I can't post pictures of it, but I'll list them, and you can just, you know, like do a Google search at what the colors of some of these crawfish are, and you can help see what I'm talking about, why red can be very effective. It can also help you with your jig game if you start looking and going, hey man, you know, I live in whatever state, and do a search of whatever types of crawfish you have in your state, what are the most prevalent, and then maybe start buying jigs based on that. But that's why green pumpkins, browns, black and blues, and then red works so well. Guys, hopefully this answers some questions for you. If you have any more questions, drop them down below. I'll be glad to answer them as best I can. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching. As always, get out on the water, be safe, and go stick some lips.
Fish. Number 5.